Testing. Okay, so I don't know what the hell is going on right now. My laptop decided not to work the way it's supposed to. Something happened. I don't exactly really know. It appear as though uh my laptop um is not recognizing that I am speaking, or at least my phone is. So yeah. I apologize for the delay for 10 minutes of complete and utter silence. That one is probably on me to figure out. My name is Colin Azuli, 4968. I am otherwise known as Joshua T. Stewart, and I want to welcome you all. Welcome to the Nightfall. Tonight's episode is going to be a little bit different than the previous episodes have been, specifically because I am the only one here to be able to talk about tonight's subject matter. The Sodder Children disappearance, slash murder, slash kidnapping, slash who really knows. Tonight's episode is not brought to you by anything. We don't have a sponsor yet. But I want to say thank you to everyone who watched both both episodes of Through the Breach, as well as last week's episode of uh, Welcome to the Nightfall, where we covered the Hinter-Kaifek murders. In 1945, a family of 12 woke up to find that their house was on fire. The father and the mother were able to safely evacuate 10 of their children outside the house. However, five, sorry, 5 of their children, that one's on me. However, 5 of their children were not accounted for and were believed to have died within the house fire. The house finished burning an hour later, and the father, the mother, and the 5 children all believed that their other 5 children were no longer in the house. They were dead. They were gone. However, evidence eventually came out to point to a fact that it might have been entirely possible. It really could have been that the children did escape the house, but were never seen again. Tonight's episode of Welcome to the Nightfall will be discussing the Sodder Children disappearance, the events that led up to it, the events that have transpired after it, suspects, and a possible motive, as well as a couple of theories presented through the internet, as well as posited by myself into what happened to the children. Allow me to welcome you to the Nightfall. George Sodder, born Giorgio Soddu in Tula, Sardinia, Italy, was born in 1895. At the age of 13, he immigrated to the United States and, and eventually settled in Pennsylvania. George Sodder eventually found work on the railroads in Pennsylvania, carrying water and other supplies to workers before eventually taking a more permanent job in Smithers, West Virginia. Starting his own trucking business, initially hauling dirt to construction sites and coal mining in the region, he eventually met and fell in love with his future wife, Jenny Cipriani, a storekeeper's daughter in Smithers who had also immigrated from Italy in her childhood. The Sodder family eventually settled in Fayetteville, West Virginia, which also had a large population of Italian immigrants, and a two-story timber frame house 2 miles north of the town. In 1923, Jenny gave birth to their first of 10 children. Throughout the Great Depression, George Sodder's trucking business became more prosperous, and he became one of the most respected middle-class families uh, around Fayetteville. However, throughout the time, George Sodder began voicing his opposition to current Italian leader and dictator Benito Mussolini. The last of the Sodder children, Sylvia, was born in 1943, but by then their second oldest son, Joe, had left home to serve in the military during World War II. The following year, Mussolini was deposed and executed. However, George's criticism of the late dictator had left some hard feelings. In October 1945, a visiting life insurance salesman, after being rebuffed, had warned George the following: he would go up in the smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. Direct quote from the life insurance salesman. Attributing all of this to the dirty remarks you have been making about Benito Mussolini. Before December, or a few weeks before uh, the climactic house fire, George Sodder had a worker come out to his house and inspect and rewire his house, the power and the electronics and the power inside his house to prevent any electrical fires or of the such from happening. However, in the weeks before Christmas that year, George's older sons had also noticed a strange car parked along the main highway through town, its occupants watching the younger Sodder children as they returned from school. On December 24th, 1945, the Sodder children celebrated Christmas Eve in their home. Marion, the oldest daughter, had been working as a dime store working at a dime store in downtown Fayetteville, and had purchased toys, brand new toys, for her younger siblings, Martha, Jenny, and Becky, ages 12, 8, and 5, respectively. This is important because the children, excited to have their brand new toys, requested their mother, Jenny Sodder, to uh, to stay up later that night than normal. I guess this was a thing in the Times back in 1945. At 10 p.m., Jenny took the um, youngest sibling, let's see, Sylvia, upstairs with her, and they went to bed together. It is also important. It is also important to note that George Sodder and, and his two youngest sons, John Sodder and George Sodder Jr., ages 23 and 16 respectively, respectively working with their father, were already asleep. So at this point, the only ones still awake are Marion, Martha, Jenny, Betty, and one other child who I will mention in a little bit. Going to our currently asleep are George Sodder, Jenny Sodder, Sylvia Sodder, John Sodder, and George Sodder Jr. At 12:30 a.m., Jenny was awoken by a phone call from a voice that she didn't recognize, a female voice that she didn't recognize, asking for a person whose name she didn't recognize. She also noted that the voice on the phone sounded a little bit weird, like they laughed as a party seemed to be going on in the background. As Jenny had later reported, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses in the background. Jenny had told the caller that she had reached the wrong number and hung up the phone before returning to bed. As she went to bed, she noticed that the lights were still on downstairs and the curtains were not drawn, something that she had always noted her children have doing if they had, or at least turning off and drawing the curtains before they went to bed if they had stayed up later than their parents. Jenny found Marion, her older daughter, in the living room asleep on the couch. As such, Jenny assumed that the other children who had stayed up later had already gone back up to the attic where they slept. She closed the curtains, turned out the lights, and returned to bed. 30 minutes later, at 1 a.m., Jenny was again awakened by the sound of an object hitting the house's roof with a loud bang and a rolling noise. After hearing nothing further, she decided to go back to sleep, assuming that it was a pine cone or something in nature to that effect. 30 minutes later, Jenny awoke to the smell of smoke coming from George's office. Inside the office, she found a fire raging. Well, after when she got up again, she found that the room George had used for his office was on fire around the telephone line and the fuse box. Jenny woke him, and he in turn woke his older sons. So that's Jenny, George, John, and George Jr., all awake. Both parents and four of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., escaped the house. They frantically yelled to the children upstairs but heard no response. They could not go up there as the stairway itself was already aflame, preventing George or anyone else in the family from uh, reaching them if they were indeed still within the house. John Sodder said in his first police interview after the fire that he went up to the attic to alert his siblings his siblings sleeping there, but he later changed his story to say that he only called up there and did not actually see them. Efforts to find and rescue the children were unexpectedly complicated. The phone itself did not work, and Marion rushed to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. The fire department would later not show up for 8 hours, despite only being 2 miles away. Driver on a driver on the nearby road had also seen the flames and had called from a nearby tavern. They too were unsuccessful, either because they could not reach the operator or because the phone there turned out to be broken. Someone eventually was able to contact the fire department, but again, they didn't show up until 8 hours later. George, however, barefoot, climbed the house's outside wall and broke open an attic window, cutting his arm in the process. He and his sons intended to use a ladder to the attic to rescue the other children, but it was not in its usual resting spot in the house and was not able to be found. A water barrel that could have been used to extinguish the fire was frozen solid. George had tried to pull both of the trucks he used in his business up to the house and use them to climb the attic window, but neither of them would start despite having worked perfectly during the previous day. Frustrated, the 6 soldiers who had escaped had no choice but to watch the house burn and collapsed over the next 45 minutes. At that point, it was assumed that the five remaining Sodder children within the house burned up in smoke. They were dead. They are gone, essentially. They were unable to be rescued, and according to the coroner's report, or at least according to the investigation, their bodies may or may not have been cremated by the fire. The fire department, low on manpower due to the war and relying on individual firefighters to call each other, did not respond until later that morning. Chief F.J. Morris said the next day that the already slow response was further hampered by his inability to drive the fire truck, requiring that he wait until someone who could drive was available. Firefighters, one of whom was a brother of Jenny's, could do little but look through the ashes that were left in the Sodders' basement. By 10 a.m., F.J. Morris told the Sodders that they had not found any bones, as might have been expected if the other children had been in the house as it burned. According to another account, they did find a few bone fragments and internal organs, but chose not to tell the family. It had also been noted by modern fire professionals that their search was cursory at best. In other words, the firefighters didn't really do a very good job at trying to find the remains of the five Sodder children. Nevertheless, F.J. Morris believed that the five children unaccounted for had died in the fire, suggesting it had been hot enough to burn their bodies completely. And thus ends the tale of the Sodder children. Or does it? As you may have guessed, the reason why this is being considered a true crime case is because the five children's bodies were not found within the rubble, and many theories have tried to posit new information on what happened to five remaining children. The rest of this episode will be me explaining exactly how that may or may not have happened. In the aftermath of the fire, F.J. Morris told George Sodder to leave the site undisturbed so that the state fire marshal's office could conduct a more thorough investigation. However, after 4 days, George and his wife could not bear the site anymore, so he bulldozed 5 feet of dirt over the site with the intention of converting it into a memorial garden for his lost children, effectively ruining the site to prevent anyone from discovering whether or not the children's bones were still within the house. On December 30th, death certificates were issued for all 5 of the missing children, effectively confirming by law that all 5 children had died within the fire. However, the local newspaper contradicted itself, saying that all the bodies had been found, but then later on in the same story reporting that only part of one body was recovered. George and Jenny were both too grief-stricken to attend the funeral on January 2nd, 1946, although their surviving children did. It's important to note that a lot of the story is misconstrued as well as questionable at best, from the firefighter response time to the accounts from the family and some information that could suggest something more sinister was afoot. However, the fire department eventually ruled that the house fire was caused by an electrical fault. Now, that can be misconstrued, well, actually not misconstrued, that can be debated because George Sodder claims, or had claimed up to that point, that he had already had someone come out to his house to work on the house uh, and rewire any faulty wiring. So George Sodder personally believes, or had personally believed, that anything that happened regarding faulty wiring could not have caused the house to go up in smoke, up in flames. Also, a little bit of information here. If the house had caught on fire because of an electrical fire, the power to the house would not still be on. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but the family posits that as a piece of evidence towards their children having been possibly kidnapped or murdered on the property. A telephone repairman told the Sodders that the house's phone line had not been burned through by the fire as they had initially thought, but cut by someone who had been willing and able to climb 14 feet up the pole and reach 2 feet away from it to cut the phone line to the house. So, here's the thing. By this point, all evidence is pointing to the house fire being actually arson, not an accident. Funnily enough, a man whom neighbors had seen stealing a block and tackle from the property around the time of the fire was identified and arrested. He admitted to the theft and claimed he had been the one who cut the phone line, thinking it was a power line, but denied having anything to do with the fire, thus effectively making the arson ruling questionable. However, no record identifying the suspect exists, and why he would have wanted to cut any utility lines to the Sodder house while stealing the block and tackle has never been explained. Jenny Sodder said in 1968 that if he had cut the power line, she and her husband, along with their other 4 children, would never have been able to make it out of the house. It's also worth noting that the family claims to have seen the lights on in the house while the fire was raging. Though in a state of panic, we don't know that is considered accurate. Jenny, however, became obsessed with the idea of cremation, questioning how a house fire that burned down a wooden house in less than 45 minutes could have cremated her children. She talked to some investigators as well as some morticians about what happens when you cremate a body. It's important to note that the morticians all mentioned that the human body takes up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to burn or to be cremated. But even then, fragments of the bones would still be left within the ashes, leaving some form of physical remains. It contrasted the results of the fire with a newspaper account of a similar house fire that she read around the same time that killed a family of 7. Skeletal remains of all the victims were reported to have been found in that case. in a very similar case to hers. Is I'm sorry, I must correct something earlier. It was 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, or 1,090 degrees Celsius for 2 hours, and for 2 hours, far longer and hotter than a house fire could have been, to have burnt the human body completely, even leaving fragments of bones. Remember, the house went up in flames and completely collapsed, and the fire was out almost an hour later. There is no way, physically speaking, that a fire could have burned at 2,000 degrees Celsius for that long, for 45 minutes to an hour, and cremated all 5 children. Absolutely no way possible. The Sodder truck's failure to start was also considered evidence towards a possible motive. George Sodder believed that they had been tampered with perhaps by the same man who stole the block and tackle and cut the phone line. However, one of George's sons-in-law told the Charleston Gazette Mail in 2013 that he had come to believe that Sodder and his sons might have, in their haste to start the trucks, flooded the engines. Some accounts have suggested the wrong number phone call to the Sodder house might have also somehow been connected to the fire. However, investigators later located the woman who had made the call. She confirmed it had been a wrong number on her part. So now we're gonna get into some subsequent developments to the case, uh, introducing some new factors as well. It is at this point that the Sawyer family began to believe that the 5 children were not in the house at all during the time of the fire, but instead have had either escaped and been kidnapped from the house itself, or had left the house of their own accord before the fire was set. As spring approached, the Soggers, as they had said they would, planted flowers in the soil bulldozed over the house. Jenny Sogger tended it carefully for the rest of her life. However, further developments in early 1946 reinforced the family's belief that the children they were memorializing might, in fact, be alive somewhere on the planet. Evidence soon emerged indicating that the fire had not started in the electrical fault and was instead set deliberately. The driver of a bus that passed through Fayetteville late Christmas Eve said he had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. It is quite possible that the rolling sound that Jenny Sawyer heard at 1 a.m. was in fact a pineapple bomb, or um, or what could have been just a hand grenade, or or some other incendiary device used in combat. The family later claimed that, contrary to the fire marshal's conclusion, the fire had started on the roof, although by then there was no way to prove that it did. Other, other witnesses have come forth to say that they had seen the 5 Sodder children after the fire, but in different locations. For example, a woman at a rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, West Virginia, said she had served the 5 children breakfast the next morning and noted the presence of a car with a Florida license plate in the rest stop's parking lot as well. The Soggers eventually hired a private investigator named Cece Kinsley to look into the case. Kinsley informed the family that the insurance salesman who had threatened George over his anti-Mussolini sentiments had also been on the coroner's jury that had ruled the fire an accident, creating a I can't remember. I literally had it on the tip of my tongue. A contradiction of uh, whatever. The guy who warned the family that he would literally burn down the house and destroy his kids was literally saying on the jury that ruled that the house fire was an accident. That can't be a coincidence. Conflict of interest. That's what it is. Okay. He also learned of rumors around Fayetteville that despite his report to the Sodders that no remains had been found in the ashes, F.J. Morris had found a heart, which he later packed into a metal box and secretly buried. However, this report eventually came out that F.J. Morris had buried a liver instead of a heart in order to provide some form of closure for the Sodder family. A lot, there were a lot of different rumors going around following the children's disappearance. For example, there was in the 1960s, the family received a postcard in the mail. It may have been a picture of one of their sons, one of their missing sons. But when the Sodder family hired a private investigator to go look for this individual, the private investigator themselves went missing. The family since then has continued to investigate the possible any possible leads on what happened to the rest of the children, with every member of the family continuing to believe that the children survived the fire but were kidnapped or murdered, with billboards such as the one featured on screen right now asking what what their fate was, providing monetary reward for any information that they could get that they could get for any information on the whereabouts of their children. So now we're gonna go into a few theories about what could have happened to the children. The first theory is a popular one. The children did, in fact, die in the fire. Now, obviously, evidence points to the contrary, but like every person, every fire is different. You never know what could have happened. And because George Sodder went and destroyed the house the before anyone could actually investigate the property and find out what truly happened, we will never know if the children uh, we will never know how the fire started. We will never know where it started, and we will never know if the children could have gotten out of the house in time. That's one of the more morbid theories. A lot of people don't want to think about that, but it is also a viable theory that yes, the children did die in the fire, and their remains because the fire brigade didn't do a very good job at exploring the ruins and the remains of the house. That is entirely possible. George Sodder buried his buried any remains of his children in the basement of his house, underneath the mound of dirt. The second theory is that there was a cover up. Note how F.J. Morris and the rest of the firemen did not show up for 8 hours later. Obviously, because the fire station was entirely understaffed because of the war, as well as other remnants of the Great Depression. They were understaffed, so they had to wait until they could go and assist them. However, even so, 8 hours is a very long time, even by normal standards. Wherein if you're here for 8 hours, if you're waiting 8 hours for firemen to show up at your house that has already burnt to a crisp, you're gonna be mad. A lot of people consider that was possibly a cover up, because there is evidence saying that the FBI offered to assist the Fayetteville Police Department in investigating the case, and they denied. And Fayetteville Police Department denied the FBI's assistance. However, not very much else can come to mind when it comes to the fire being that. However, it is worth mentioning that George Sodder was infamous around town due to his continued spread of hatred of Benito Mussolini in a town filled with Italian immigrants. So it is entirely likely that yes, there was a cover up, but not in the way you probably think. However, I digress. Next up, next on the theories is that it was actually the fire itself was actually caused by a third party. It was actually arson. As I mentioned before, the Italian community was not a big fan of George Sodder's views on Benito Mussolini. We do not have any suspects that any viable suspects that could have started the fire, and unfortunately, all we really have to go off on is that yes, the phone line was cut, but we don't know by who. The ladder was moved into a place that wasn't easily recognized, and the trucks did not start. So, yeah. The final theory is one of my own. This final theory is the last one I'm going to discuss tonight, and this is going to be it for the rest of the show. My personal theory is that the children wanted to escape themselves. As someone who has been very opinionated throughout his teenage years, and seeing how most of the children that went missing were teenagers, it is entirely possible that the children themselves were not fans of their father's continued hate for Benito Mussolini. Some of them may have supported him. Some of them may not. It is possible. I'm not saying that it is entirely likely, but it is possible that the children planned an escape themselves from uh, from the uh, from the Sodder family home. They would know how to ensure that they would know how to ensure that the trucks would not start, that the ladder, we're gonna move the ladder in a place that would not be normal, and the sound rolling on the roof could have very well have been something in the attic rolling over as one of the children was moving around the attic. Keep in mind the 5 children that went missing were all in the attic. However, however, this theory is not entirely plausible, and there's a lot of information about this case that we still don't have. Sodder Children family mystery is still being investigated today, and the current descendants of George and Jenny Sodder are still continuing to search for answers into this case in any way they can to find their missing parents. Sylvia, the youngest daughter, is now a grandmother. I believe, however, she has passed away. But her grandchildren are are now looking to find answers to this case. So what happened to their great aunts and great uncles? What happened to the Sodder children will probably remain a mystery. And unfortunately, that's where we gotta end it. I know this episode wasn't exactly the best. I know that for about 10 minutes, you guys had to listen to silence because of my unfortunate technical difficulties, but I will make sure those are properly resolved next week on Wednesday. Next Wednesday, in this Wednesday's episode, we will probably have more people available. We will be talking about. Let me double check to see what we're gonna be talking about next week. For next week's episode, it will be. Let me zoom in real quick. Give me one moment. Oh, next week's episode is gonna be a little bit rougher on me with the pronunciations. A cold case, literally and figuratively. Join me next Wednesday and as me and the rest of NIGHTWAV Productions and cast dive deep into the Russian mountains to find out what happened to 8 men in the NIGHTFALL past case. Ladies and gentlemen, guys, been welcome to the Nightfall. Thank you all for coming in and joining me on today's episode. Again, next Wednesday, that will be February 16th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. My name is Joshua T. Stewart, otherwise known as Callan. You can follow NIGHTWAV on Twitter at NIGHTWAV Podcast. You can follow The Satellite, one of our other podcasts, at The Satellite Pod. And you can follow me on Twitter at Callan Official. Please stay safe out there. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, please leave them in the comments below. And please have a wonderful rest of your night. Have a wonderful rest of your week. And until next time, this has been Welcome to the Nightfall.